The Abrahamic faiths include Christianity. Well, first of all, it includes Judaism. We should start there with Abrahamic faiths. And out of that also developed Christianity. And out of that also developed Islam. And so we have the Abrahamic faiths, which proportionally make up a huge percentage of faith goers or believers as a whole in the world. Just a massive percentage come out of this singular tradition in Abraham. So I wanted to start there this morning in terms of, let's talk about the beginning of where our faith kind of built from. Maybe you know this about me, but I actually went to school because I had a really great preacher growing up, and I just hung on his every word, and I loved what he did, and he had a really cool job. He worked on sermons for 20 hours a week, and he spent 20 hours in prayer a week. And I thought, man, that's a super awesome job. And I loved everything that he did. And so when I went to school, I thought, I'm going to do that. And so I started studying speech and religion and had a good time, and then did an internship with somebody at a church that wasn't 5,000 members, and I saw this is what ministry actually looks like, and I thought I can't handle that. I can't do that kind of work, and I can't keep all of those moving parts. That doesn't look fun. So I said no, and changed directions, but I stayed with my course of study because I loved the history of things. And so the further I got into my studies, the more I wanted to know about where we came from. And it is so interesting to read through the Old Testament and see some of the historical pieces, and you see elements of other religions creeping in, and you see moments like even with the story of Abraham, where you really see a statement. It's part of our text, but because we're not seeing the bigger picture, because we're not living in it, we don't recognize that it's also speaking out against other things that are going on and other religions that are happening at the same time period. And it just fascinated me, and still does. So I think about beginnings a lot because I enjoy it. And I would hope that out of this short little series, you can see a little bit of what makes beginnings so interesting. Because all of this sort of groundwork in Genesis plays hugely into what Christianity is and where we come from and how we understand God. All comes out of these moments with Abraham and the fathers of Christianity, or fathers of faith, or the Abrahamic fathers. We have all kinds of terms to talk about these early leaders in tradition that didn't have all the religion to go with everything. So by the time you get to Jesus, we have so much stuff going on, and so many laws written and rules laid out. And Abraham was just a man responding to God. And we don't even know what that looks like, but it just amazes me. So we're going to start in chapter 12. If you've got your Bible with you this morning, we're going to start with chapter 12 of Genesis this morning. And this, in the beginning series, is just Genesis. So the first 11 chapters, here's why I think this is legit to do this. The first 11 chapters are a different kind of story. I'm not going to go into it. I love to talk about it because it, again, is about beginnings and origins and things like that. If you want to talk about it, schedule a coffee with me and we'll spend 5 hours and we'll talk about Genesis 1, 2, 3, And then next week we'll talk about 5 more hours about 4, 5, 6, But so 1 through 11 is a different type of storytelling. It doesn't fit so smoothly with chapter 12, and it's loosely connected to Abraham. And so we have this storyline that drops off. We have these pieces of stories, and then they just drop off, and we get a long telling of who begat who, and so-and-so was so-and-so's child. And then we finally get to Abram. And Abram is really who launches this faith and really gives us our first understanding of what it means to be a follower of God, to be devoted to God, to be working in the world differently than anyone else around him. So we're going to start with chapter 12. And I'm just going to read for a few verses, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And here's the pivotal moment for me in this story about Abraham. So Abram went. That's the line. That's the one that matters to me. So Abram went. In this world, in this place, we go on our own journeys, right? We have a different kind of society. You can go somewhere, set up a new home. We've got a large percentage of us are not from here, but we've traveled here. We've set up a life. We've found housing. We've found jobs and work, and everything works fine and dandy. When Abram sets off into this world, think about setting off into the wilderness in the Middle East. You don't even have to go that far. Think about taking a canoe up the Alouette and just keep going into the wilderness. You don't know what's coming. You don't know where it is. You don't know how you're going to eat. Now, some of you are just fine with that. Coach is just fine with that. Nathan's just fine with that. Many of us are not just fine with that. I'm a city kid. I don't know what that would look like. I'm not going to find my own food out there that I can eat safely or whatever. That's not completely true. I would be fine. No. But he just goes, right? This is a world where your family is your security, where your community is your protection, where foreigners are treated like dirt, okay? This is a world that has no security, no stability, and God says, go. And verse 4, so Abram went. God says, go, and Abram went. Now, some of us have come from different places here because God said go, or because of something else. But let me tell you, it's a different story. If God tells me to go up the Alouette, I'm going to think twice about that. This is the first moment in these stories where we see somebody responding and experiencing God in such a way that it drives them to drastic changes and passion in their life, because God says, you are going to make a difference in the world. You are going to bless the people and the families and around you and all over the earth. So he goes. If we don't pull that out of this story, if we don't pull that out of our origins and out of faith and out of responding to God, we treat the New Testament like it's set apart from faith and passion and all of this stuff. And this is our origin. This is the beginning. God says go, and Abram went. And he's going to continue to listen to God in ways that blow us out of the water. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we can calculate across the world, across the globe, a huge percentage of people who believe in God at all comes down to this man right here and the way he understood God and the way he lived it out. He doesn't have the history that we think about when we talk about God. When we tell God's story, we start with Abraham. We start with, maybe we start with Moses in Egypt and God rescuing these people from Egypt. Abram doesn't have that backstory. He is our backstory. And so it is amazing to me that here is a man who experiences God some way without the building, without leadership, without the history that we put all behind faith and religion and Christianity and Judaism, and just experiences God for who God is. I don't know what that looks like. If you know what that looks like, we got to talk. Because everything I know is wrapped up in this tight little coil about theology and church and everything else. But this is faith at its core, and it's part of our origin story. It's part of our history. Over the next few generations, what we're going to see in this story is family member after family member taking on this task of sharing God with those around them. The next piece, and I come back to this frequently because I find it fascinating. The next piece that is so amazing about this is that Abram's call is different. His call is to go out and bless other people. Again, you care for your own family. You care for your community. You set up boundaries to protect to protect your community from outsiders. You look after those. There's an inherent need in how you live to care for those in your community. And Abram's call is different. Abram's blessing is different. Let's hear it again. Actually, let's look at 15. We hear this blessing again in terms of a covenant. He says, look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. And he responded to God, but God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And he said to him, bring me a heifer. Oh, this is quite interesting. Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat and 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought all of these things, and he cut them in two, laying each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when the birds of prey came down, Abram drove them away. Now, typically, I've done this illustration before. Do you remember this piece? No? See, I don't remember last week's sermon, so that's okay. So he's cut these animals in half. This is the second piece of this blessing that we talked about. He cuts these animals in half, and this is traditional process for making a covenant with somebody. So God is treating himself as one partner in this covenant, and he's cut these animals in half. And the next step in this tradition is to walk together between these animals cut in half. Now, I don't know if they're down the center, or if they went on either side of the spine. I don't know. That's fun, right? Anyway, so he is intended next to walk with God. This would be expected. And everybody reading this story, when it's written, knows what's supposed to happen next. They're supposed to walk together to show the bond of their covenant together, which is that God will bless Abraham, and Abraham is going to listen to these commandments that God gives him. But something interesting happens here. A deep sleep fell upon Abraham, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended on him. And then the Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation for the iniquity of the Amorites. We don't need to get into all that history. We don't have time. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. So Abram has gone into this sleep, but presumably he is supposed to walk through this with God. Yet instead, 2 items representing God walk down to make the covenant. God makes a commitment to Abraham almost without the return commitment, knowing that that covenant can't be kept, knowing that Abram's people fail over and over, as we do. But God's committing to both pieces of that covenant. It is a remarkable thing because everyone knows what's supposed to happen, and yet turned upside down. Instead, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river of Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Amorites, Perizzites," and on and on. Don't worry about all that. It's too much. But here is something new that happens with Abram. So in all of this, 2 things. Abram experiences God without all the mess around it, without having to figure out which Christians can I trust and not trust, who's in authority and how do they maintain power, and all of this stuff that has come with religion and the rules over time that have been built and built and built. He just experiences God. And when God says go, he goes. When we see that in our history, when we see that in our origin story, it should give us a little bit of inspiration on what we're looking to do in our own faith, in our own life, in moving forward. And the other piece is that this blessing is more than just you're going to be blessed. You see, that's what we would like. We make a lot of commitments because we're going to get something out of them. And you expect the covenant to be, I get this, and you get this out of it. We have a mutual exchange. Instead, God walks through both pieces, and Abram is committed in this covenant to be part of a people that blesses everyone else. This is new. It is revolutionary in understanding who God is, and it's part of our origin story. So as we start looking through Genesis and all of these people come next, we're going to see experience of God that doesn't have strings and doesn't have the buildup of religion around it. It's just a people responding to who God is, to how they see God, to how God expresses in their life and in their community. We need more of that. It's not easy. It's not easy to figure out how to experience God without church. Thank you all for being here, though. It's not easy to let all of those extra things go away and really just listen and feel and experience God. But when we look into our origin story, when we look into our history, and when we look for the beginning of what's going on, ultimately, these early days, these early authors are just experiencing God and trying to put it into words. Experiencing God and trying to respond appropriately. That's our goal. That's our purpose. That's part of our history.